Validity and reliability are two very important concepts in research, and action research is no exception. They are also very large concepts. There are many types of validity and reliability, and we could read books and we could have probably a whole class on each one of these topics if we got into them seriously. For our purposes in this class, we're going to talk about the two more generally, and we're going to talk specifically about how they might connect to action research. Validity is the accuracy with which a research instrument measures what it is designed to measure. So in other words, you have a research question. You need to design tools that will help you find the answer to that research question in as valid a way as possible. Now, what we have to think about is we are dealing with students, we are dealing with human beings. And when we're dealing with students, there are many variables. There's really no way we can be 100% sure that our tools are going to be valid, but we're going to work as hard as we can to make them as valid as possible. You see the Popham quote here. Popham says, "There is no such thing as a valid test." By being very intentional as we create our tools, and by creating different kinds of tools, we can get as close as possible to results and conclusions that are valid. Here you see a picture that's rather silly. A bicycle is not a valid form of transportation for a parrot. That makes no sense. We're mixing things that don't align. An invalid research tool is a tool that is not appropriate for the task to be measured, just like this bicycle is not appropriate as a means of transportation for this bird. We need to think carefully about how we can make our tools valid. That includes a thought process that starts with our task. What is it that we want our students to do based on our research question? Then we need to say, now what is the best way for me to measure the results of that task? What is the most authentic way I can possibly think of to get accurate results? Once we get those results, then we look at the data, we collect the data, and we analyze it, and then we draw a conclusion or conclusions. And hopefully the conclusions are valid conclusions, where the evidence that we've collected aligns with the question and then supports the conclusion. This is what validity is all about as we think about creating our research tools. As you think about validity then, ask yourself these questions. Does the data allow me to say anything relevant about the question asked? Have I considered the many things that could affect the validity of my conclusions? Have I thought about the bias in my participants, for example? Do I have a good sample for my study? Have I thought about diversity in populations? Have I thought about how my results might change if my populations were diverse? Have I thought about when and how I'm gathering this data? Am I choosing a time that is right? Am I choosing a method that is right? Are these methods and times going to give me the best data possible? Have I considered my own personal bias? Do I have tools that are objective, or are they leading students in a certain way because of something I'm hoping to find? We need to think about how to make our tools as objective as possible, so that the information we get is authentic and as valid as it possibly can be. Let's just consider some situations and see if we think that these would be valid or non-valid ways of collecting data. I teach writing, and I'm teaching the writing process to my high school students. And I'm teaching it through a collaborative step-by-step process that's very engaging to students. But when I assess the results, I assess it with a multiple choice test. Is that valid? And of course the answer is no, because we're not assessing the way that we created the test. We are not going to get valid results by doing that. They are not aligned. What if I'm giving a science test and my goal is to know how well my students understand a particular science concept? I decide to use a written test because it's fair and equal, and I'll give it to all students, and that will give me unbiased results. But what if some of my students are ELL? Then am I going to get accurate results by giving only a written test? Probably not. I need to think about the fact that my valid responses may be invalid if I'm thinking about my students' ability to write or speak in English if that's not their first language. What about if I ask students to respond to journal prompts and code the results based on specific criteria? Now I'm getting closer. I have specific criteria that I'm looking for. I have a prompt that I'm going to give all students, but they can respond to the prompt in their own way and at their own level. So I'm getting to the point now where, at least with this one tool, I'm getting closer to something that is valid. What if I'm measuring behavior in my class? And I want to keep track of off-task behaviors, so I list them very specifically. And I ask a colleague to come in at the same time every day for several days. It's the same person, and I have them tally what they are seeing. Am I going to get valid results? Well, I'm not really sure, to tell you the truth, but I'm close to valid, and maybe I'm as close as I can get. I've listed the very specific behaviors. I have the same person doing the tallying. I'm going to do it on the same time of day, so I'm limiting my variables, and I'm making my tool as valid as it might be able to be, as long as I'm dealing with human beings. Validity is all about getting as close to the actual truth as possible. Keep that in mind as you think about creating your tools. Reliability is the degree to which a research instrument produces consistent results. Reliable is like consistent. Those are good interchange words. In fact, Popham says if you were never to utter the word reliability again, preferring to employ consistency instead, you could still live a rich and satisfying life. To think about reliability in your research, ask yourself these questions. Do you believe you would get the same results if you did this again with another group of students? In other words, as you look at your tools, do you think they are reliable? Would they give you similar results if you tried this again? Ask yourself, do you have confidence in your findings? Consider these things. Questions in a survey may not be understood the same way by students. For example, if you ask a student to respond to something and one of the options is rarely, one student might say, well, yeah, I do that rarely. I only do it a couple of times a week. Another student might see rarely as once a month. Another student might see rarely as something different. We need to think about how things are interpreted. We also need to think about the fact that different observers may not see the same thing. So for example, if you asked me to observe something in students and you asked my colleague across the hall, we may see things differently. We need to think about the fact that different subjects may not give consistent results. For example, our students, our participants, are all individuals. We may not get the same results from those individuals. Students may also be affected by what they think they should be doing. What do they think you're expecting of them? That can affect results. Human beings are not the same. Each person is different. There are no completely reliable instruments. We work with different sources and instruments to make allowances for this. So we certainly want to consider reliability as we create our tools and get as close as we possibly can to something that is reliable and would be if we were to use it again. While we want to work intentionally to create reliable assessment tools, validity is really what we're all about. Our action research is going to be done in a short amount of time with one group of students, probably. So we need to know that our tools are valid, that they're measuring what we are intending to measure. Educators should understand the concept of reliability. It's an important part of all research, including action research. But for our purposes, it's probably a second focus to validity. As you listened to and read the words on this slideshow, you may have noticed some things that sort of overlap. There's a lot of confusion about these two words and how they are connected to all kinds of research. And you'll notice in the middle there are some common factors between validity and reliability. Validity. Does our tool measure what we intend it to measure? Reliability. Would it be consistent over time? As we think about how both of those could be carried out, how they might look, how they might sound, I think you'll see that there could be some possible overlap there. This is especially true for action research. If we were working in longitudinal research, a large research project over time that involved many groups of students and something much larger, then these two would need to be very carefully separated. But for our purposes, it's okay that we're seeing some common ground, because what we're after is trying to get at authentic information, at a real answer to our research question. We're trying to get as close to the truth as we possibly can, and we need to consider both validity and reliability as we do that. Think about validity and reliability as it connects to action research. There are some specific things we want to consider. First of all, action research is not the same as scientific research, but validity of the research tools matters. It's important, so we do need to think about that. A control group may not be needed in action research as it often is needed in scientific research in order for us to form valid conclusions. If we have good research tools, if we have several kinds of research tools, so in other words, we're triangulating our research, we can get valid results. As we've discussed earlier, they may not be 100% valid, but they can get us very close to the truth. Considering things like ethical considerations and multiple forms of data also contribute to this discussion because they contribute to valid conclusions. So we need to keep those in mind as well. We want to have different tools, different ways to gather our information so that we have a varied way to answer our question. The goal is, again, to get as close to the truth as possible, knowing that our conclusions are really just inferences. They're really just educated guesses. They are inferences based on evidence. And that's what action research is all about. As you create your tools, gather your data, analyze your data, and find conclusions, be very careful about how you state those conclusions. We've talked about the fact that we're dealing with human beings. And with human beings, our research is really never going to prove anything. Can form conclusions that will improve our teaching and thus improve our students' learning. But we can never say we absolutely know that this is going to work, because when we deal with human beings, there are many variables. In fact, there are so many variables we probably couldn't list them all. So as we create our research tools, we want to consider validity and reliability. We want to be intentional about trying to get to an accurate and valid measure that will answer our question.